Welcome to the CDA Institute's Geopolitical Update. I'm Josh Malm, Director of Research and Analysis for the Institute, and I'm joined by geopolitical expert Joseph Varner, Deputy Director of the Conference of Defense Associations and former Director of Policy for the Minister of National Defense. In this podcast, Joe will provide his analysis and insights on the most significant geopolitical and international security developments of the week. So grab your headphones and get ready for a concise but comprehensive update on the world's most pressing geopolitical issues. The CDA Institute encourages rigorous debate on national security matters through our events, research, and publications. Joe, great to be with you again for the Geopolitical Update. Can you provide our listeners with a brief overview of what's been happening on the global stage this week? What are the key highlights and trends that we should be aware of before we get into more specifics?
Three stories this week that are of particular interest are the U.S. presidential race, dueling aircraft carriers in the South China Sea, and Chinese bases in the Caribbean and South America. One of the top stories to watch coming out of last week that's spilling over into this week is the pro-debate performance of U.S. President Joe Biden against former U.S. President Donald Trump. This has led to calls for him to be replaced, and it's left Donald Trump in a buoyed position going into the final stretch this fall. Instability in the Democratic Party ahead of the presidential election leads to greater instability in the United States as a whole, and in fact, makes Biden weak domestically and internationally. And so in this case, in the international case, it's important to be aware of the spoilers in the international system that now want to finish Biden off and elect Trump president. Countries like North Korea, Russia, and China may have a vested interest in seeing Biden go down and act out to ensure that this happens, taking advantage of perceived instability. And it's worth noting that the Chinese have a tendency to test new presidents very early in their presidential mandate. And in this case, we could see the Chinese either move to act in the South China Sea against their rivals now or early on in a new presidential mandate.
Well, Joe, if Donald Trump is elected, we're not quite sure exactly what that'll mean for the international security order. So that'll definitely be one to watch. I agree. Why don't we touch on the South China Sea next? Has anything changed since our update last week?
So it seems we have a case of dueling aircraft carriers now operating in the South China Sea. For the first time, China is operating two aircraft carriers in the waters off the Philippines, in that their second aircraft carrier, the Shandong, and a Type 075 class amphibious assault ship are actually off exercising in the Philippines EEC. The Type 75 class amphibious assault ship the Chinese have is slightly smaller than the USS Wasp class. These flat tops are being escorted by two Type 055 class cruisers and a mix of other Chinese warships. And meanwhile, the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group has entered the South China Sea via the Luzon Strait, and the Roosevelt Carrier Group has started to shadow the PLA's Navy's Shandong Aircraft Carrier Group in what appears to be a coincidence. China's third and most advanced aircraft carrier, the Fujian, appears to be heading out to sea on its third trial starting on Wednesday. Since early May, they've gone through trial after trial in short succession, which suggests the smooth progress so far for the aircraft carrier as it works up.
Well, thanks for that insight, Joe. One more big ticket item, and that's Chinese bases in the Caribbean and South America. So why don't we touch base about those for a moment?
So it's a story that in some ways went under the radar, but a little bit closer to home, satellite images have shown the growth of Cuba's electronic eavesdropping stations that are believed to be linked to China, including new construction at a previously unreported site about 70 miles from the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Cuba has upgraded and expanded its electronic spying facilities at four sites: Bajucal, El Salado, Wajah, and Calabazar. Two of the sites near Havana contain large dish antennas that appear designed to monitor and communicate with satellites. Cuba doesn't have any satellites, but the antennas would be very useful to China, which does have a substantial space program. And the most recent of the four sites being built, and not previously known publicly, is El Salado, which is outside the city of Santiago de Cuba in the eastern part of the country and not far from the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo, as I already said. Construction began there in 2021, and the site appears designed to hold a large formation of antennas known as a circular disposed antenna array, which can be used to find and intercept electronic signals, such as monitoring phone calls in the southern US. So if you're on vacation in Florida, you might want to watch what you say. China's presence in the Caribbean and South America is not new. China is seeking the use of the Punta Arenas port in Chile for the exploitation of Antarctica. China is pushing Argentina to build a naval base in Tierra del Fuego province as another gateway to the White Continent and to guard the straits. And China may try to install a naval base in the multi-purpose megaport of Shanghai in Peru to allow the arrival of Chinese warships. China has a high security 200-hectare compound that operates a powerful 16-story antenna at a Chinese base located in Valletta El Agrio in the southwestern province of Argentina. The base is manned by personnel from China's Satellite Launch and Tracking Control General, a group that ultimately answers to the People's Liberation Army. And the facility is tightly guarded and quite secret. All these facilities and potential bases have the attention of the U.S. intelligence and military community that are none too happy about Beijing's presence in the U.S. backyard.
Well, Joe, those are the three big ticket items of this week. As we close out this episode, do you have any parting insights for our audience, or are there any other stories that they should be watching that might become more important or relevant in the coming weeks or days?
In stories to watch, I'd say that the eyes are going to turn to Washington, D.C. for the upcoming NATO Summit, which is going to focus heavily on Ukraine, but is also likely to focus on defense spending among NATO member countries. As well, a situation that continues to heat up is the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah fired some 200 rockets at Israel today, and they've carried out attacks on Israel every day since October 7th. Pressure continues to build on the Netanyahu government to secure the north so that Israeli families that have been displaced by the fighting there can return home and kids can get ready for school in the fall. This comes as the Israeli Ministry of Health gave instructions to hospitals in the north to prepare for mass military casualties, and hospitals and care clinics started to move patients to hospitals elsewhere in the country. A telltale sign of a build-up to military operations is always the preparation of medical facilities in advance of fighting. Lastly, Russia has the presidency of the UN Security Council, and be prepared to see Vladimir Putin use the high office at the UN to bolster Moscow's foreign policy objectives at the expense of the US and its allies. So watch and shoot.
Thank you, Joe, for your insightful analysis and for guiding us through this week's geopolitical developments. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week as we reconvene with Joe to delve into another week of global affairs. Thanks again, and see you next time.